Okie dokie. Detroit techno matters. Detroit sound and its influence on modern dance music. Again, I am super excited to be here. I am a huge believer in Femme House and what it represents, as well as all the active work that they do in the electronic music industry. I feel like we need more inclusivity efforts with each passing month, especially here in the United States, where it seems like there are more and more politicians trying to strike down diversity initiatives. But we are focusing today on Detroit techno and why it matters. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about the diaspora surrounding um, electronic music has been, and always will be a fundamentally Black queer art form. And as it pertains to electronic music, Detroit has a huge presence in electronic music and how it came to be. So today we're going to go over a little bit about the Detroit sound, what that is. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Detroit and how the context of Detroit in the 60s and 70s helped give birth to this genre. And also talk a little bit about its influence on techno. And then at the end of this, hopefully, we'll have enough time, but it is my goal to work through during this session and build live 32 bars, a session using the fundamentals of the Detroit sound, the skeleton of a track, which I am then going to give to you all. I'm going to ask the fine people at Femme House to take those stems and give them to everybody that participates in this session. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what y'all have to say. And yeah, so let's just get started. Okay, cool. So Detroit sound and its influence on modern dance music. So the goals for this session, as I discussed, we are going to provide historical and cultural context for the genre. Additionally, we are going to highlight some notable artists within the space and how they helped shape this scene. We're going to go over some of the basic components of what makes a track, quote unquote, Detroit, as opposed to Chicago or New York or Miami. And then using those components, we are going to build a basic 32 bar skeleton as a starter for an original track. So before we get started, who am I? Just a quick intro if you don't know who I am. Again, I'm Babyweight. I'm a DJ. I've performed at Coachella, EDC, Drinker Camp Out, Lightning in a Bottle. And I've also shared stages with people like Chris Lorenzo and LPGOB, Sammy Bergie, Duran Duran. I've done a lot of club gigs, a lot of festival gigs. I've been around. I'm also a producer. I've released on Insomniac, He, She, They, Yes, 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 Club Sweat, Southern Fried, What to Do, Rules Don't Apply. The list is much larger than that. That's just a sample. But that's just to say I've had multiple releases on respectable labels. I'm known for being an advocate, specifically for being a mentor through Femme House and Change the Beat with Sydney Blue, in addition to my many vocal efforts, especially on social media, for greater inclusivity in dance music. And I've also had multiple nominations, but more specifically nominations for Breakthrough DJ of the Year by DJ Mag, as well as Breakthrough Producer of the Year at the Femmies, which was hosted by Femme House and Billboard Dance last year. So we can't talk about Detroit or its music unless we talk a little bit about the socio-political background. And I'm going to go ahead and say that Detroit techno is an Afrofuturist statement, and it was a genre that was kind of created within that context. So when we're talking about the socio-political background of Detroit at the time, we have to talk about a little bit of the history, right? So when we're looking at the confluence of things that happened in order for this genre to come about, right? In Detroit specifically, there was the quote unquote white flight that happened post World War II, that was combined with deindustrialization. So basically, what happened is a lot of white people fled to the suburbs in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This was exacerbated by the race riots in 1967. If you've seen the movie Detroit, this talks about a very small sliver of that situation. The too long don't read version of that is it was a riot instigated by the raid of what is called commonly referred to as a blind pig or a speakeasy. It led to 43 deaths, 1,200 injuries, almost 7,200 arrests. And this created a lot of racial tension in Detroit that led to the Stress Task Force, which was something that was in 1971 and 1973, which created this bubble of brutal violence between police and the African American community in Detroit. Stress at the time standed for, I wrote this down. Guys, I didn't want to mess this up. Stop the robberies, enjoy safe streets. So this was a militarized, proactive police. So people would basically pose on the streets and then engage with people. It was a predatory tactic, and this led to even more tension. And then going into the 70s, there was also a drug and gang culture in Detroit that was breeding, thanks in no small part to the desperation that was being created by a lot of these scenarios that were being perpetuated, mostly by the patriarchy. Like, let's just be straight up, like, white people really destroyed Detroit in a lot of ways. And we have to take responsibility for that. And it's important to note that during Black History Month because we, as allies, have to really take responsibility for the things that have happened in the past. So you have this scenario, right, which then led the people of Detroit to then focus on community and self-education and Black entrepreneurship, which we all love. This then created a very tight-knit system of subcultures, which thrived on collaboration and innovation and creation, versus capitalism. So when I say cooperation versus capitalism, these were people that were more interested in creating and building together, versus just doing something to make a quick buck. And in so doing, they kind of like harbored this very nuanced artistic community that would go on to thrive. And this would eventually lead to the dawn of Afrofuturism as it pertains to Detroit. Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic that explores the African diaspora through the lens of science fiction and progress. It's a way of imagining possible futures through a Black cultural lens, according to Ingrid LaFleur. A good example of this would be Sun Ra, Space is the Place, or Parliament Funkadelic, the work of George Clinton, people like Bootsy Collins. What this allowed for was this combination of science, this combination of forward thinking and scientific principles and a focus on community to kind of like have this very forward thinking idea of what not only Black people could achieve, but also what they could create and what they could do together. It's a very idealistic way of thinking, and a very progressive way of thinking. And it's no shock that this helped give birth to Detroit Techno, which at the time was very forward thinking. Again, just for some extra credit, some seminal works and pioneers of Afrofuturism, like I mentioned, is the film Space and Place by Sun Ra. I would also look into DJ Kool Herc, who was doing a lot of amazing work with this aesthetic in New York. Think like how he influenced people like Afrika Bambaataa, and also look into the album Mothership Connection by Parliament Funkadelic, which is going to connect to the next slide. May the funk be with you. So the origins of Detroit techno also happened to coincide with the dawn of FM radio. So up until the 70s, AM radio was what you would mostly interact with when you turned on the radio. FM radio basically allowed for new content to be streamed and to be transmitted across the airwaves. As such, you have individuals like the Electrifying Mojo. So the Electrifying Mojo was this radio disc jockey by the name of Charles Johnson. He was a radio host at WGPR, WJLB, and WHYT in Detroit. And he is oftentimes highlighted as one of the largest influences in Detroit techno and how it got started, because he was a key influence to a lot of the early pioneers of that movement. So he was known for his open format, genre bending programs, which would oftentimes play entire albums front to start. So you would hear everything from new wave to funk to rap, all with over the course of his program with no interruptions. It was a very forward thinking way to present music at the time. And it really kind of helped set the tone for a lot of disc jockeys going forward in terms of how they created mixes. He was also known for being an early adopter and supporter of artists like Kraftwerk and Prince, which at the time in the 70s, they were both making very groundbreaking music. Now, he was very well known for part of his program, the intro, which was called The Landing of the Mothership. This had a huge impact on Detroit techno, as you'll see in a moment, because what this was an introduction which sampled space sounds as well as early ambient electronic music. So at a time when most people would turn on the radio and they would hear either talk radio or classical or pop or R&B or rock music, here was a disc jockey who was creating these very theatrical experiences and implementing sounds that were very uncommon for the time. Especially for a city like Detroit, which at the time was mostly known for rock music and Motown. Now, he was also known for something called the Awesome segment. It's worth noting that both of these segments weren't in every single program that he was at whenever he switched radio stations, but people do remember hearing these in terms of uh, when they looked back on their influences. And I'm going to go over some of those people in a moment, but the awesome segment was often following the landing of the mothership, and this would normally feature music from Detroit's underground. So he was an early adopter of really focusing on on the music of a very central region. Um, Nowadays, we talk about the Chicago scene, the New York scene, the Miami scene, the LA scene. Um, this person really kind of went out of his way to create definition and a subculture for his city, which I think is really important when you talk about the legacy and the impact of Detroit, because Detroit is one of the few scenes and one of the few subcultures that has like a very clear, precise definition in terms of when it started, the community that was kind of created, and who perpetuated it and who moved it forward. So the lineage and the family tree is very specific, and it all stems from this specific disc jockey trying to really create a correlation between the city and the culture and the music that was being created from it. It's worth noting that some key tracks from this period was Number of Names by Charivari, which came out in 1981, but was heavily played during 1980, which is an early example of techno music at the time, as well as Cybotron's Alleys of Your Mind, also 1980. This is also an early example of Lon Atkins. Which brings me to the Midnight Funk Association, also known as the MFA. The Midnight Funk Association was a segment of the Electrifying Mojo's programming that followed him throughout his entire tenure as a radio disc jockey, right? So he would oftentimes play everything from new wave to early techno to funk. He would sometimes play entire discographies, be it Michael Jackson, be it Prince. And he would use this as an opportunity for himself to blend soul with cutting edge electronic sounds. So he was actively trying to meld different worlds, which was really unique at the time and really kind of set the tone for an entire generation of people who would go on to become DJs and music producers. The Midnight Funk Association was also designed. It had this very long introduction that was along the lines of to the thousands of people in Detroit and the people listening beyond, now is the time to rise up. It was an act of solidarity, asking listeners to be active participants in the program. So he would oftentimes ask people to hit the horns in their cars or to go out on the front porches. It really created this larger sense of community, which would go on to define Detroit as a culture, and also the music that would come from that. Honestly, the Electrifying Mojo, the more that I learned about him when I was putting this program together, the more that I felt like this pride in this genre that I hadn't quite felt before, because it really does go to show that electronic music, our roots have always been in trying to bring out the best in people and trying to create community. And I really love how groundbreaking a lot of this was at the time. So worth noting, artists like Jeff Mills and Carl Craig and Marcellus Pittman have named the electrifying mojo as a major influence on their early careers. In fact, Jeff Mills would go on to become a DJ in his own right. He would be known as the Wizard, and he had quite the following in his own as well, and would go on to define Detroit, the sound of Detroit techno throughout the 80s, before becoming like a DJ and a producer during the second wave, which I will get to in a moment. So you can't talk about Detroit techno without talking about the Belleville Three, right? And the Belleville Three were this was this trio of young guys who listened to the radio, specifically the electrifying mojo, and were really into music that was coming out of Europe. And I guarantee you know who they are. It's Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, also known as the Initiator, the Innovator, and the Elevator. Um, they are called this because they grew up together in the Detroit suburb of Belleville. They're actually not from Detroit. Um, Funny enough, Detroit techno is something that came from the suburbs and bled into the city. But you'll see how it kind of helped create this community and this thing to have a lot of pride in. So they were largely influenced by the music that they heard on the Electrifying Mojo, like I mentioned before. Um, More specifically, they also traveled to Chicago to see artists like Frankie Knuckles and Ron Hardy at clubs like the Warehouse and the Music Box. These were kids that were trying to go beyond what was immediately available to them in their very rural suburb of Belleville and try and find like a sense of culture, a sense of belonging. And what they found uh, was this shared enjoyment in this kind of like futurist world, this idealistic world that is right at their fingertips, that was new and expressive and interesting, and was this cross-pollinating blend of things that they grew up with and things that were new to them. So they are considered by most to be the originators of what we consider quote unquote Detroit techno. If you look through the history books, you can always find Atkins, May, or Saunderson somewhere in there, in the fold, every step along the way. Now, Detroit techno is defined by a focus on reflecting post-industrialist Detroit, which is a mouthful, but they do this by blending the mechanics of artists like Kraftwerk with the soulfulness and culture from Chicago's emerging house scene, right? So they were really into this idea of the new with the old, and finding this way to blend the two, in a way to kind of like highlight the artifice while also showing the soul in the community, if that makes any sense. So some prime examples of their work include Derek May as Rhythm is Rhythm, the track Strings of Life, Juan Atkins as Model 500, the track No UFOs, and Kevin Saunderson as part of Inner City, the track Big Fun. Now, just as a note, Every city has its venue where people come together and gather. The church in this context was the Music Institute. This was a club that was founded by Shane Damier, Alton Miller, and George Baker. And this was a pillar for bringing first and second wave Detroit techno artists together. Um, uh, this club is no longer around, but you can feel, especially when you visit Detroit, the impact that this club had on the culture, because all clubs in Detroit are gathering places. And we would go on to see that kind of aesthetic carried around in other cities as their scenes evolved. Obviously, the Music Institute took notes from the Warehouse in Chicago and the Paradise Garage in New York, among others. But depending on the city that you're in, we can use places like the Music Institute as kind of an example of where we've come from, like in terms of how we've gone on to define clubs as spaces for community gatherings. Now, you can't talk about the first wave without going into the second wave. Now, the first wave historically is is the stuff that like we kind of know, but like the second wave is the stuff everyone's familiar with, right? And this is because it was largely due to this compilation called Techno, the New Dance Sound of Detroit, which came out in 1988. This is largely considered the mainstream crossover event because it introduced the United Kingdom and Europe to the Detroit sound. This was a collaboration between members of the Belleville Three and Virgin Records. This was also the first formal introduction of techno, quote unquote techno, in reference to a genre of music. Now, this is a reaction to the Belleville Three's desire to make a clear distinction instead of being a regional iteration of Chicago's house sound. It's worth noting that originally this compilation was going to be called something along the lines of the Detroit house sound. And the Belleville Three, who inspired by Afrofuturism and going forward, and the technical capabilities of drum machines and whatnot, they'd been using the term techno to describe their own music to people for a while. So they used this as like the first formal implementation and definite by defining it now as techno. So we can track it back to them. The second wave also kind of was spurred by the advent of European rave culture. This crossover introduced maximalism to Detroit producers, which they embraced because this was like Germany and the UK and it was introducing things like brutalism to these artists coming from Detroit, and that aligned with their more harder industrial kind of outlooks. So they embraced the harder industrial sounds, the breaks, the acid tones. And some notable producers and DJs from this second wave include Jeff Mills, who was also part of Underground Resistance with Robert Hood and Mike Banks. DJ Minx, who would get her start in the early 90s, going into the 2000s. Carl Craig, who I mentioned before, and Octave One. Note about DJ Minx, If you're not familiar with her, she is a incredible, badass DJ and producer from Detroit. She's one of my favorite people in the whole world. Um, she is the label boss of Woman on Wax. Highly recommend you check out her seminal track, A Walk in the Park, which came out in 2003. So, you can't talk about Detroit techno without talking about Movement Music Festival, right? So, a little bit about Movement. So, Movement is during what I would consider this current wave of music coming out of Detroit, right? So, it started in the year 2000. It was originally called Detroit Electronic Music Festival. It had creative direction by Carl Craig. In 2003, Derek May stepped in, and that's the first time they named it Movement. That was the first time it had ever been considered that. In 2005, Derek May stepped away after considerable loss on money. And Kevin Saunderson threw an event called Fuse in Detroit, which had uh, the quote unquote it was known as like Detroit's first movement, right? And then in 2006, it was acquired by Paxahau, right? Who had worked with members of the Belleville Three in the past. They'd also worked with Carl Craig in the past. Paxahau is a giant promoter in Detroit, and they have helped elevate it to what is known now. Initially, Movement was founded to celebrate Detroit's impact on electronic music, and it was a celebration of the progressive nature of the genre. Again, linking back to the ideas of Afrofuturism, about linking it back to a city that was built by Black and Brown people, a community that really focused on being tight knit and entrepreneurship, and doing things by the grit of their teeth, um, and a genre that like was birthed from that. Now, this is considered by many to be a mecca for dance culture. It's also a standard bearer for American music festivals. I am a firm believer that Movement is one of the best music festivals I've ever been to. Highly recommend you go if you have the opportunity. Really quick, I just want to make sure I'm not boring people to death. Um, can everybody just in the chat just let me know how they're feeling? I finally enabled it so that everybody can drop a message if they want to. Just want to make sure everybody's okay and I'm not boring them to death. Okay, so everybody's good. All right, cool. Um, Let me see. I think there's a way. There should be a way to turn on everyone's ability to chime in the chat if they want to. Yes, Ashley.
Hi, the chat is still showing as disabled to me.
Okay, cool. So let me thank you. Let's see. Oh, How about now? Awesome. Cool. Oh, thank you. We finally got that going. All right. So before I get to how to create some Detroit techno, let me just make sure everyone is not being overloaded with info right now. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they that want to know more about? Yeah, that's a great question. So the first movement festival was in fact free. It was given to the people of Detroit as kind of like a celebration. It did fall on what is considered the 20th anniversary of the genre, because most people consider 1980 to be like the like the like specific point in which the very first Detroit techno record was released, which, like I mentioned before, is Cybotron, Alleys of Your Mind, which was that duo that Juan Atkins was part of. And so so they threw this free festival. I think the first year it had something like 1.7 million attendees, something crazy like that. It was the highest attended year by far, in the entire history of the festival, which I think is insane. But yeah, that's a great question. The first movement was in fact free. Yeah, it was open to the public. I don't think it was like there was like an age restriction or anything back then. It was literally like a community event that they threw at Hart Plaza. Okay, cool. So I am going to reopen um, this really quick and kind of like go back. Whoops. Share, share. Um, okay, cool. So, oh my God, I just want to have the chat while I also have this. Um, oh, there we go. Cool. Sorry, I am learning how to do things at the same time. You can tell this is, but anyway, who? Okay, so the basics of Detroit techno. Who's ready? And hopefully, we are going to go into Logic because that's what I use because I'm a little gremlin that doesn't use Ableton. And we are going to create a quick little Detroit techno track from scratch. And then I'm gonna give the stems to the good people at Femme House so I can give it to you, and that way you have something to tinker around with. Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's go. So, like I mentioned before, right? Going back to our lovely electrifying mojo, Charles Johnson, the DJ, right? With the landing of the mothership, um, we are talking about an emphasis on blending mechanical and industrial synthetic elements, okay, with funky and rhythmic elements to create futuristic scenes. Okay. Again, Huge emphasis on Afrofuturism, on artifice, on sharpness, but also because we are talking about a genre that is largely defined by its sense of community and togetherness and belonging. There is a core there that is human as well. Okay. So that's like where like some of the funkiness and the rhythmic ness of it and like the soulfulness of it comes from. Typically, Detroit techno is somewhere between 120 and 150 BPM. Okay. Most commonly, we're probably looking in the ballpark of 120 to 130. Okay. Now, if we're talking about artists that have been inspired by Detroit, um, you know, coming out of the UK and Europe, um, you'll notice that there's a correlation in the 90s with artists from Detroit making music that's faster, largely because of rave culture in the UK and Europe. Okay. So when we're talking about artists like Richie Houghton, for example, okay, those tracks might lean a little bit faster. Okay. If we are talking about like straight brutalism techno, right? The likes of Charlotte DeWitt, who, you know, is very much more in that European end of the Detroit techno scene, because again, Detroit techno is also about adopting European sensibilities as well. Then yeah, we're talking 140, 150. But if we're talking about classic Detroit techno, 120, 130, I would say is kind of that soft spot. Might be a little bit slower, especially if we're leaning more into like kind of like that R&B soulful kind of end of things, which with artists like Moody Man or Terrence Parker, you might get that. That kind of like Detroit piano, techno house kind of vibe. But if we're talking straightforward Detroit techno, again, 120, 130, maybe 130 to 150 if you're going for that more minimal Jeff Mills kind of vibe. Now, the foundation is largely drums, and it's largely four on the floor. Okay, there might be some polyrhythms here and there, which means it's like a rhythm that kind of like bounces around a little bit, like something that might be like yeah, 6/4 on top of a 4/4. Which, if you're into music theory, that makes sense. I'm not classically trained by any stretch of the imagination, but you typically hear things like polyrhythms in, you know, artists like Jamie XX or Radiohead. But largely, it's pretty straightforward. And that's because a lot of this is being programmed on drum machines, right? We're talking TR-808s, TR-909s, and TR-707s. These are going to be our backbone of Detroit techno. Okay. 808, known for its more boomy, synthetic kind of vibe. This was the earliest drum machine that Roland put out in the 80s, very well known in hip hop, especially in things like African Bambaataa. TR-909 is known for its more punchy transients. So if we're talking boomy, boomy usually has like a longer tail. TR-909 is more, it hits harder. It doesn't have like as much space after it. And then you have the TR-707, which has more of like a dry, almost plastic feeling to it. I say it's dry because the TR-707, believe it or not, they use actual samples of like actual drums, actual hi-hats, things like that. So it has this it has this very specific quality to it. The TR-909, TR-808 is going to be more common when we're talking Detroit techno, especially stuff that's made in the 80s and 90s. So for the sake of argument, we're going to focus more on the 909 and 808 for this session. However, the 707 is a beast of a machine, and they also have some very wonderful hat sounds. Now for synthesizers. For monophonic synths, we're talking the Korg MS-10. All right. For FM synthesis, the classic Yamaha DX7, can't go wrong. Used in such lovely tracks as like Whitney Houston's Everything, like everything from the 80s has a Yamaha DX7 pretty much. Then for polyphonic and semi-modular vibes, we're talking the ARP Odyssey or the ARP 2600. ARP Odyssey was a cheaper version of the ARP 2600. So Detroit, which is a sound that is largely defined by a lack of resources. More often than not, you would have come across an ARP Odyssey back in the day in Detroit over an ARP 2600. That being said, they both provide great functions, great leads, and they're polyphonic, which means you can play multiple notes at the same time. And then the thing that we all love, the Roland TB303. That's right, honey, acid. And so for the sake of this lesson, when we open up Logic and I create this 32 bar loop for you guys, we're going to be focusing more on acid leads. And then we're also going to focus on some monophonic stuff as well. Just want to double check with the chat. Are we still good? Yes. All right, cool. Awesome. So, quick note about Detroit techno, vocals are sometimes a facet, okay, but not always. All right. More often than not, if you do have vocals and something that is like Detroit techno, right? It's usually minimal or soulful in nature, right? Because they're trying to combine elements of, like I said before, organic with artificial. They want the industrial with the soulful. They want but they want that marriage to kind of lean more in that futuristic, technical, forward thinking kind of realm, right? So you'll often hear like in Detroit techno, like maybe somebody is like talking over a track, like you know, in house music, you have that. In the beginning, there was Jack, and Jack had a groove, and it was the groove of all grooves. In Detroit techno, there's a kind of a very similar vibe to that, where it's people telling a story, and that also ties partially into um, the 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 act of storytelling, right? And in poetry, and in like creating a narrative about your community. So, there's links to hip hop there as well. So that's it for the presentation part. Do we have any questions? Is there anything that people want me to go over? Is there anything that I missed that somebody wants to chime in and mention before we move on to the musical component? Alrighty. Well, if nobody has any questions, I'm just going to crack open Logic and get into the meat and potatoes, get into the stuff that you producer gremlins wanna take a quick look at. Alrighty. I hope everybody is having a great day. It is really cold over here on the East Coast. That's very flattering. I'm glad the highlight of your day is this. All right, I'm just opening a new project file over here. And making sure that all the settings are right. Okay. And now we are going to share the screen. Okay, cool. So let me know if everybody can see my screen. I hope everybody can see my screen. All right. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So, like I said, we're going to focus on some of the key components here, right? We're going to do the 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 32 bar, 16 bar loop roll, which if you um, haven't done that before, just a quick recap of that because it's something that I have done as a guest on other people's things and something that I talked about in last month's session. So the basic idea is you create 8 bars to then stretch it into 16, and then you stretch that 16 into 32. And then hypothetically, you can take that 32 bars and copy and paste it maybe like 2 or 3 times. And then over the course of your record, just subtract certain things and bring them back in. And you can, in theory, have a complete track that way. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a drum designer. Drum kit designer, stereo, ultra beat. Okay, cool. So Logic has this kind of synthesizer right here, which has a bunch of preloaded drum kits and banks, right? Like they have an 808, they have a 909, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now in Ableton, you have very similar drum kits and banks to pull from. So this should be uniform across the board, right? The idea of this is that you should be able to create a Detroit techno track using any DAW. Okay. Now we are going to focus on the basics here, right? So, like I've been kind of hammering on, the Detroit techno sound is defined largely by restrictions and industrial sounds, while also trying to have some kind of a heart at the base of it, some kind of a heartbeat. Okay. So in that case, I'm going to choose the 909 because I prefer punchier drums. Um, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to pull up the 909. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a keyboard here. Can everybody hear that? All right, cool. So normally I work with samples, okay? But in the event that you don't have a splice, um, like a you don't pay for splice or anything, and you're just using what's stock, we're going to do what's stock in this case, okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a MIDI track for each individual thing that we need, okay? So we're going to call this one kick. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to call this one closed hat. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to call this one snare. We're going to duplicate again. Open hat. We're going to duplicate again. We're going to call this clap. Okay, so these are going to be like your basic drum choices. Okay, now there might be like some other things that you can add or subtract, like maybe there's a different type of hi-hat, maybe there's a shaker, maybe there's an open hat, right? But Detroit techno, especially classic Detroit techno, is kind of defined by its robotic, almost structured, uh, um, like commitment to the grid. Okay. In fact, it wasn't until the 909 or the 707, I think, until like swing was even a thing on these drum machines. So we're really going to focus on just getting the basics in and going from there. Okay. And again, it's my aim to get these bounced down and sent to you guys so then you can then use these basic stems to create a track of your own. All right. So we're going to start with 4 bars first, stretch the 4 to 8, and the 8 to 16, and the 16 to 32. All right. So here's the boring part, guys. Here's the part that nobody likes to do, which is highlighting everything, making sure it's quantized, making sure it's like all the right. Oh no, I want it on quarter notes, and making sure it's all the right velocity. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate that. Oh, no. All right. Now for closed hat. All right. I like the sound of that, so we're going to go with that. I'm going to turn this down so that way it like doesn't hurt everybody's eardrums. Oh gosh. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to highlight that, and then we're going to make sure that it is on the upbeat instead of the downbeat. All right, and then we're just going to do a clap. Pay no attention to the fact that I am terribly offbeat and have to rely on. All right, so now we have to add like some kind of like funky bits here, right? So maybe like a snare that's off. All right. So now we're like starting to get into like the nitty gritty. All right. So now we're probably going to have to create a baseline, right? So a really easy way to do this, like in the context of like Detroit bass, is to like kind of go into like that, like, like kind of like more of like a ghetto tech direction. So like what we're gonna do is um, we're gonna use a tom to accomplish that. Again, it all comes down to like the restrictions and like really focusing on kind of like what you have at that moment and kind of like keeping it robotic and industrial, and like resisting the urge to kind of like add a ton of like crazy flourishes. So we're just going to call this base because that's what it's acting as, right? And we're going to increase the velocity on that so it also punches a little bit harder. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to take these closed hats. I'm going to combine this loop really quick. We're going to highlight all these hats and we're going to add another hat right after it. So that way it's like double hat action. Is everyone like kind of getting the vibe here? How are we feeling on this so far? I'm just really quick going to stretch that out to 32 bars right there. And because we are trying to keep things like strictly to what we have available, what I'm going to do is we're going to use the Ultra Beat, which is this like little drum machine sampler thing. And actually, we're going to switch it up. We're going to do a 303. Where we're going to use a monophonic synth to kind of like create that uh, that 303 sound. So this is the mini moog made by Arturia. So again, we're kind of like combining elements like electronic elements that are inorganic. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add like a couple of organic elements to kind of like really tie it together and create that human element that helps define Detroit techno. That like combination of forward thinking, Afrofuturist, like heavily precise, um, along with like a human soulful element. All right. I have no idea what key this is going to be in, but we're just going to run with it and see what we create. Or better yet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an arpeggiator. And I'm just going to choose a random groove here. We're going to bring the octave range down. All right, so right there we have 8 bars. Really basic, kind of like acid, arpeggio kind of vibe. And then what we're going to do is a little trick, a little arrangement trick, where in order to create like a sense of flow, a sense of like things like changing, we're going to mess a little bit with like opening up the envelope, or the filter, so that it kind of like it becomes more and less acidic over time. They kind of like give it the feeling that like things are changing. Is everyone on board so far? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we have a couple of questions here. How much does the key matter when making techno versus house? It's a great question because obviously when you're a DJ, you kind of want to mix in key, or mix in key as best as you can. When it comes to techno versus house, you're kind of you still want to keep things in a certain key, but I would say there's an emphasis on minimalism in techno that isn't really present in house music. So doing if you're doing a track in if you're doing a techno track like the arpeggio I just did, right? So that's a C chord, right? That's what I used for the arpeggio. So because that's a C chord, you're not going to want to do like really kind of like go outside like those 3 notes, really. Um, like you're not going to want to do like a traditional C to G to A minor or like a C G F. Like it's not like traditional songwriting per se. Um, it can be, but that's kind of like when you're venturing more into kind of like the more housey end of the Detroit end of the spectrum. If we're talking more of like classic Detroit sound, you're going to want to focus more on like the industrial electronic kind of elements, and then add like a little bit of funk into it by like adding like a little bit of shuffle with the drums or something. What is the Arturia thing called again? Is it what you get when you buy the Arturia V collection? Yeah, it is. So this is the mini V3. Um, I was gifted these years ago, so I haven't updated in a very long time. But this is just a three oscillator monophonic synthesizer. It can be polyphonic if I wanted to, but I don't. It's only polyphonic in this case because I threw an ARP on it, so it's playing all three notes at the same time. So we have the 32 bar loop here. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to basically we're just going to take away a couple of things. So what I'm about to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of automation on this to kind of like finish this like 32 bar. So I'm going to do that by messing with the cutoff a little bit so that it kind of like comes in over time. And then it'll get like really bright here at the end. and then just kind of like drop off here. So just so you can see what that sounds like. You see how it kind of like creates this sense of like rising tension. Very minimal choice, but it adds just a little bit enough. Just gonna like push it over the edge into the next 32 bar section, right? So we're just gonna add a couple extra flourishes here just to build this out. And so we're gonna do that by I'm gonna duplicate this, and we're gonna put a crash here. So we're going to put a crash at the beginning of every beginning of every 8. So just like a really small thing, but what it does is it adds like a little extra tension whenever there's like a new thing happening. Now you can accomplish this with like risers or like impacts or whatever. But traditionally, if we're talking about drum machines and we're talking about like, Detroit techno, this is how it was done on drum machines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like a high passed kick here just to have like a little bit of variation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away some of the lows, not all of them, but some of them, maybe drop it off at 115 hertz by throwing an EQ on. Sorry, I'm doing a bunch of things super fast. But what that's going to do is it's going to create like a little 8-bar section here right before the drop where you can kind of like have like a little turnaround here. And what I'm going to do is at the end of this, we're going to have like a little snare roll. So it'll sound like this. You see how it kind of creates that little turnaround there? We can even create more attention by like really stretching out that snare roll. And then what I would probably do there, just to kind of like ratchet it up a little bit, is maybe take away the open hat and the clap in that section. And the bass. And so that it's just that like little acid lead. Yeah, and then there, like literally the sky's the limit. You could just have like if you really wanted to, you could just have kick with like maybe some of that acid. And then bring that open hat back in. Maybe bring that snare back in, like there at the end. That like snare roll that we created with a crash, like right here. You guys get the drift? Now let's speed this up a little bit. Let's make it like, I don't know, 126. That feels a little fast. So like let's maybe do 123. And then we want a human element, right? So let's pull splice. And we said that it was a C chord acid. So like let's grab a quick vocal. Or you know what? I'll just we'll just create our own vocal. Screw it, right? Or actually, I just realized it's not even plugged in. Hold on. So I'll record something on my phone because we are talking about limitations here. Let's see. I'm ready for my future. Is the future? No, that's not. Let's see. Get away from your past. Stick with the future. All right, go ahead. I'm just going to send this to myself on my computer. Get away from your past. That's a little loud, so we're just going to do that. Bring it down a little bit. Get away from your past. Okay. Get away from your past. Stick with the future. All right, so we're going to have to flex this a little bit. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm just doing some quick editing so that it's all on the same line where it needs to be. Get away from your past. Get away from your past. Get away from your Let's see. Is this making sense to everybody? Let me know if I'm getting too lost in the weeds here. Get away from your past. Stick. Get away from your past. Get away from your past. Get away from your past. Away from your past. Get away from your past. Stick with the away from your past. Stick with the future. 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 Stick with the future. Away from your past. Stick with the future. Away from your past. Stick with the future. Yeah, and so you just have a little human element in here. You bring it every 8. Get away from your past. Stick with the future. Get away from your past. Stick with the future. Get away from the past. Stick with the future. Yeah, it's a basic idea. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead, quick bounce this for you guys, but I'm going to stop sharing it. Boom. So, quick recap. Um, Detroit Techno. Without Detroit Techno, we would not be where we are today. Detroit Techno was largely influenced by the clubs that were popping up in Chicago, most notably the Warehouse and the Music. Um, oh my God. Most notably, uh, the, oh my God. I had it tip my tongue. Uh, most no- Most notably the Warehouse with Ron Hardy, Frankie Knuckles, in addition to the combination of music that was playing on the radio at the time, most notably by the electrifying Mojo through his programming on WGPR, WJLB, and WHYT. Such parts of his programming, notably the landing of the mothership, um, the awesome segment, as well as the MFA, really helped paint a very eclectic picture for the people of Detroit at the time of what music could be and where it could be headed. And the young people of the time who were greatly impacted by the socio-political situation that Detroit and the surrounding suburbs were embroiled in, thanks to the race riots in 1967, things like stress, things like the drug culture that was happening, where people all they really could do to stay safe if you were young was stay indoors and listen to music. Really enabled them to have this community-led entrepreneurial, uh, again, Black, brown entrepreneurial spirit, largely based in community, largely based in record pools, largely based in working together and cooperating versus every man for themselves, dog eat dog, capitalist type bullshit. Um, Led to the Belleville Three, Juan Atkins, Derek May, Kevin Saunderson, who together helped lay the foundation of what we now know as Detroit Techno. More specifically, that compilation in 1988, which then brought techno overseas to the UK and Europe, which then led to a cross pollination here in the US and the second wave of techno, which then led to Carl Craig, Jeff Mills, who was also a radio DJ, keep in mind, and other artists such as DJ Minx, Floor Plan, Robert Hood, and then that that culture brought us to movement in the year 2000, which largely pushed Detroit to now. And in terms of the Detroit sound and how it's defined, we define the Detroit sound today largely by its commitment to industrial aesthetics, Afrofuturist aesthetics, and looking to the future while also having a stark commitment to the community that you have now. So I hope everybody got a lot from this lesson. I'm sorry it was a 2 hour session. I promise the next one will be shorter for those of you who don't have 2 hours to hop on here. But for those of you who stayed on to the bitter end, thank you so, 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 so much. I also want to give a shout out to the fine people at Femme House who have asked me to be a mentor this year. And I cannot wait for next month. Next month in March, I have another session with y'all. Which will be a Ask Me Anything session. Um, So it's a opportunity to ask whatever questions you have about DJing, becoming an artist, trying to find representation, building a team, you name it. Um, so I'm really excited for that session. If you are interested in other things that we have going on for Black History Month, we also have a Black virtual DJ meetup on February 19th. And then I also highly recommend that you all look into writing chords and melodies as well as top lining for dance music with Claire Marie Lim. Again, all of the programming that we have here on Femme House is free. It just requires an RSVP and a hunger and for learning about music and a positive attitude. So thank you again. I hope you all have a lovely evening. Again, I'm going to bounce these stems out once I hop off and give them to the team at Femme House. Hopefully, the team at Femme House will then be able to send them to everybody that RSVP'd and signed up for this. So that way you can go ahead and make your own Detroit techno track for yourself using some prime 909 samples and acid leads. You guys are absolutely the best. In terms of where you can catch me, follow me on Instagram at Babyweight Music. That's the easiest place where you can keep up with whatever new tracks I have dropping or events that I have coming up. I do have some things that I'm getting ready to announce. I'm super excited about. Or you can become part of my entourage at vault.fm if you want exclusive things like edits and remixes and other sweet treats for the low cost of free. So, anyway, have a wonderful night, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay warm if you're on the East Coast. And remember, a woman's body is her own business. Trans lives matter. And happy Black History Month. I will see all of you in March.